Hello everybody, welcome back to Coffee Beans and Horror Fiends. I went to the movies yesterday and I feel like I still smell of buttered popcorn and really bad buffalo wings and kind of okay cardboard pizza, and it's glorious. I missed the movies, I really did. If my title did not give it away, I saw Spiral from the Book of Saw, and I have some thoughts, of course. Prior to watching Spiral, I actually rewatched all of the Saw films.
I'm gonna say that there is at least a chance that I didn't think this through completely.
And I'm not a major Saw fangirl, just to clarify that. But I liked it. I find that they are entertaining. There are a few pretty good ones, and then there are a sprinkle of some that were fine, and a couple that were
no bueno.
maybe not so great. Nevertheless, I am going to be ranking all of the Saw films in the franchise, including Spiral, and also I will be trying the new Dunkin' Donuts Girl Scout cookie drinks. If you're new here, we don't just do horror, we do coffee as well, but don't fear. If you're not interested in the coffee or the ranking even, and you just want to see the Spiral review, if you don't want to watch it in its entirety, I will leave timestamps below, and I will also try and put in chapters. We'll see if I can do that. I am currently very, very thirsty, so we are going to try these first, and then we're going to get into the rankings. Wherever Spiral falls rank-wise, that's where I'm going to be doing its review, just so I'm not redundant at all. In the meantime, let's get caffeinated. Dunkin' Coffee and Girl Scout Cookies did a collaboration and it has been extremely popular. I couldn't find the Thin Mint one, so I have the coconut caramel flavor and I have the s'mores flavor. Both of these actually sound amazing. I'm very excited. We're gonna start with the s'mores flavor.
I don't know what the that was.
Okay, let's try the coconut caramel and hope that that's better. They both taste kind of similar. I'm not really feeling either. This definitely wasn't good to me. It tasted mostly just like really cheap chocolate. And this just tasted like almost very artificial. Kind of coconut and caramel. I'm not really a fan of those. The Thin Mint flavor though, that's been sold out. I'm gonna have to like go to a gas station and find it. But yeah, that was really disappointing. That was just a little quickie coffee break. Now we're going to get into the ranking of the Saw films. We are going to start off with the worst and slowly work our way down to the best, and topping off the absolute worst was Jigsaw. I was quite surprised when I saw the Rotten Tomatoes score for this. Well, the audience score, I should say. It has the highest ranked audience score out of all of the Saw films. I mean, obviously Spiral will fluctuate because it just came out, but at this moment, it has the highest audience score with a 89%. Interesting. Okay. I find myself agreeing more with the Rotten Tomatoes official score at a 33%. Where to begin with Jigsaw? From start to finish, this film was utter garbage. I'll start by saying technically, and by that I mean like looks wise, this film easily one of the best. It looked amazing. And juxtaposed to that, the writing was some of the worst. The acting was so beyond cringe. I don't understand the hype for this film. This is widely loved. I do seem to be the odd one out, which is fine. I found the traps to be stupid, like the buzzsaws in the wall and the bucket heads. And was this the film where they were like drowning in grain? The storyline was predictable for the most part. The CGI and special effects were really corny, but the biggest abomination for me personally is the writing and treatment of the character Eleanor. If you know, you know. It was just so uncomfortable to watch and so not realistic, or not that, okay.
Get your words straight, Jack.
I understand that the realism in Saw and the whole The whole idea is not realistic. I'm not one of those people that's like, it needs to be realistic. The time travel wasn't realistic. Duh. That character was awful. And it wasn't the actress's fault. She did her best with what she could. Probably a very talented actress. She just had horrendous writing. My final strike on this dumpster fire was the boring and played out formula it used. There was the red herring of Eleanor, the two timelines appearing as one to trick the viewers. In this case, a 10-year difference, if I'm not mistaken. And yet, another accomplice to Jigsaw, like, that made no sense, that didn't have to be there. Logan made absolutely no sense as an accomplice. I just felt like it was like, oh, for shock and awe, and it's like you could have done so much more. It was just awful. Moving on to number 8. Saw, the final chapter, but spoiler, not the final chapter. You might know this film better as Saw 3D. And as ghastly as you can imagine Saw 3D sounds, I promise you the reality of this film is way worse. It scored the worst Rotten Tomatoes audience score with a whopping 10% and an abysmal Rotten Tomato meter score as well with a 41%. In case you forgot, every year on Halloween, we got a new Saw film. Please ignore my hair. I know I keep putting it back and like then it falls to the front. We're just letting it do its thing. They pumped out Saw films like a machine because they were so low budget. And by the time that this film came out, most of us were already bored with Saw. I feel like adding the 3D was the bait to sort of lure us back in.
I think we're breaking up with you, Tina.
Congratulations, you played yourself.
The whole idea of someone pretending to be a survivor of the Jigsaw killings is so fascinating to me. And the B storyline, which is a fancy way of saying the storyline that no one cares about, right?
Ah, that's the good shade.
The B storyline was congested and boring. The traps, however, were brutal. We get to see Bobby Deegan's wife, and Bobby Deegan is the phony pretending to be a survivor, essentially burned to death in a factory-sized Easy Bake Oven.
The Easy Bake Oven and Snack Center presents our fastest baking mixes. Mix up the cake, it's the fastest bake.
And this is like an innocent woman. She didn't have any part in this lie. She knew nothing. We also see Bobby pull out his teeth and one of my personal favorite traps in the entire Saw franchise, the back peeling trap. This dude had to rip his skin away from his car seat because he judged others by the color of their skin, by the way. It does have meaning to it. He had to do this in order to reach a lever, I believe, to pull and save his life and yada yada yada. Alas, he fails, and his car drops down from its jack at full speed, slicing his girlfriend's head open, ripping out his pal's jaw, and then takes off full speed ahead, crashing into his other buddy, and then the car goes boom. There were a lot of moments in this film that were unintentionally hilarious in the worst way. During one particularly gruesome trap, Bobby has to save an employee of his by retrieving a key that is attached to a chain that is placed down her throat. And the more she screams, she's wearing like a collar, the deeper the screws go into her neck, so she can't scream or she'll die. And when she inevitably failed and was no longer alive, he screams at this corpse's face like, if you would have just shut up. And it gets better. We get to see a flashback of the real Slim Shady himself.
I'm Slim Shady, yes, I'm the real Shady. All you other Slim Shadys are just imitators.
Overall, the acting was horrendous, the 3D effects were abysmal and corny. The plot was, the idea was great, but the execution? It didn't work for me. Number 7 is Saw 6. Saw 6 has a relatively decent Rotten Tomatoes score. Well, I mean in like the realm of Saw rankings. It's decent in that realm. Let me clarify. I squint a lot, I know. The lights are really bright, my eyes are really sensitive. Its Rotten Tomatoes score is a 39% and a 55% audience score. And here's a fun little fact for you. When I rewatched this film, my audio was completely off. Like, I own all of the Saw films except Jigsaw. And the dialogue and the subtitles and the mouth movements, because yes, I'm one of those who uses subtitles, they were all off, which made it quite the cinematic experience. What to say? Realistically, I just don't care about this film.
You need to leave!
I don't hate it enough to go on this massive rant, but I don't like it enough to want to gush over it either. What made Saw 6 rank better than the other two was the storyline and the traps. I enjoyed the game being played in this film. I really liked the shenanigans that went on between Strahm and Hoffman. The carousel trap was awesome, and that's actually the longest trap in the Saw franchise and has the most people involved within the trap in the Saw franchise. Does that make sense? Did I say that right? We do get a few of those Saw twisty moments. I don't know what all this is, but that's what we're getting in Saw.
These are spirit fingers.
By the time the twists were actually revealed, I was kind of over the film. I wasn't really that invested. It's also the lowest grossing Saw film to date, but it was banned in Thailand, so it gets some like cool points for that, I think.
The cool points are out the window, and you got them all twisted up in the game.
That's the nicest thing anybody's ever said to me.
Coming in at number 6 is Saw 5. Saw 5 actually has the second lowest Rotten Tomatoes score with a 13%, but it does have a decent audience score with 52%. Where to begin? I believe it was Saw 5 we see Strahm for the first time. And I personally love Strahm. Well, not at first. Okay, let me explain myself. So at first, I didn't like Strahm because he is Luke from Gilmore Girls.
It's not biologically natural for people to mate for life. Animals don't mate for life. Well, ducks do, but who the hell cares what ducks do?
Why you always lying? Oh my God.
And in Gilmore Girls, I felt like he was an overrated jerk. Kind of like Big from Sex and the City.
This whole bride and groom thing is really got me thrown. I can't do this.
So Strahm and I started off on the wrong foot. But, and however, I got over this minor casting detail, and he grew on me. I don't love the whole idea of group traps. It can certainly bring more excitement, but I feel like they always have the same dynamic. This particular group situation, however, despite having horrendous characters, had a cool twist that I really enjoyed that seemed a little bit different. It's just like, haha, suckers, you should have just worked together if you weren't so selfish. You all could have made it out alive. That actually really got me, that twist. I was shook. And there were even more twists because Saw, Strahm actually survived the trap where he previously got his big old fat head stuck in a box of water that was slowly drowning him, but thanks to stabbing a hole in his own neck, he survived. We love a resourceful king. They also threw in that stupid mind game time frame nonsense. The only time I ever really liked that was in Saw 2. I think what this film does well is storytelling. There's really not a ton of gore, but you know, it's still a Saw film, so take that with a grain of salt. It's still very gory in comparison to other films, but for Saw, it's like tame. Overall, it was a pretty okay film. Number 5 is Saw 4. Saw 4 just starts off wild, man.
Oh my God! Okay, it's happening. Everybody stay calm.
What's the procedure, everyone? What's the procedure?
Stay calm.
Hey, bandit!
Yeah. We get in the opening scene the most graphic autopsy. We get peeled back scalp, a power drill through the skull, brains out, front and center, guts out, stomachs out, and sliced. What I'm trying to articulate is this is not a dinner and a movie type of flick. And speaking of which, I deserve a medal because I was eating sushi while I watched this. And fun fact, a coroner was actually on set during this scene at all times. And you're probably wondering, how does a scene like this that's this graphic and this brutal make the cut, even for a Saw film? Well, the folks behind Saw basically said, this would be in any medical documentary. What do you mean it's gruesome? So basically, Saw is educational.
Psych!
The traps in this film were pretty great. Oh my god, that ponytail one with the gears that were like ripping her hair from her scalp. We also get more time with Riggs, which I personally loved because Riggs was one of my favorite characters in the entire Saw franchise. We get to see his morality really tested because he is sort of in control of the fate of some really awful criminals. We also get to see a lot more of John's background and what makes him cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. I loved this film's plot. I thought the acting was pretty decent. The traps were cool. It was engaging. So you're probably asking, Leah, why is it so poorly ranked on your list then? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let's get into it. They brought back the Don, the founding member of New Kids on the Block, and the heir to the Wahlburgers throne, just to have him swivel on some ice and say a few cuss words. And then his head was smashed to smithereens by 2 blocks of ice. And we learn that Hoffman is yet another accomplice to Jigsaw. But wait, there's more. We learn that films 3 and 4 are taking place at the exact same time. Again, the only time twist I really enjoyed was in Saw 2, but this was okay. It was like, oh wow, this is interesting how it all links together. Overall, the audience did find this film pretty disturbing, for better or for worse. But from what I can see, it seems like it's for the better. It has a score of 62% with audiences, but it tanked its Rotten Tomatoes score with a 19%. And now, coming in at number 4, Spiral from the Book of Saw.
Hello, Detective Banks. Do you know where your officers are?
Jigsaw?
Wait, I thought the Jigsaw Killer was dead.
He is. When was the last time you saw your father?
Jigsaw copycat. This is gonna go sideways fast.
And to reiterate, this will be spoiler free. And currently this film has a 39% tomato meter and a 76% in audience score. I was beyond excited to see this film. And I think because I went in with such crazy high expectations, I may have been disappointed just a little bit. But when I sit back and I really think about it, I can kind of put my expectations aside, and going into it thinking like, hey, this is a Saw film, I would say that it falls really nicely at number 4. I thought that this was going to beat out every Saw film. I thought this was going to be better than the first one. And I was wrong. It was definitely an intense film. Like from start to finish, it is like jam-packed. The soundtrack, I believe, was done by 21 Savage, if I'm not mistaken. And that was one of the first things I noticed. Aside from like how absolutely incredible this film looked, which I will get into, the soundtrack almost completely revamped the Saw franchise, just with the sound. It made it feel fresh. It made it feel new. Obviously, it's not a perfect film, but I feel like the soundtrack really kind of made it 2021. 21. It was absolutely fantastic. There really aren't like a ton of traps in this film. It's not littered with traps, but the ones we do get are very purposeful, which I can appreciate and I think fans really appreciate as well. And they are gruesome. It is very much still Saw in that regard. It is brutal. And you can tell this film has money behind it. And let me give you some perspective on that. Jigsaw had a budget of $10 million. Saw the final chapter had $17 million behind it. And the OG Saw had a budget of $1.2 million. Spiral, however, had a budget of $20 million. Samuel L. Jackson is always a gift. He sort of elevated everyone that was in the room with him. He did not disappoint. Everyone else in this film sort of overdid it. When you really overact and give us all this extraness, it feels cringy. It's not a good thing. It felt very corny at times, which again, going in with the expectation that this is a Saw film, the acting is not going to be divine. It was fine acting. It was okay. Chris Rock, I think, did fairly well. He did seem kind of unsure. He was either being really cynical and funny and sarcastic. And for me personally, when he acted that way, it didn't really match the tone of the film or the moment anyway. And when he wasn't acting that way, he was giving us soap opera extraness. There was just some scenes that were really dramatic. Just like in any Saw movie, there's a twist. I don't think I'm spoiling anything by saying like, oh, there is a twist. I'm not saying what the twist was. It was cool. I liked it. There were some parts of the ending that really didn't make a lot of sense to me, and it kind of downgraded the film for me. I I didn't like the ending. It comes down to that. I didn't like the ending. I liked the message that it conveyed, but I thought that it could have been done better. Overall, it's a good film. I think it was definitely really cool to see in theaters. It's an upgrade from all of the Saw films, technically, and in many ways, it was really strong. But due to the overacting and mediocre storyline, some confusion around the climax, and the ending that I despised, it sort of falls in the middle of my list. Number 3 is Saw 2. Saw 2 scored a 36% with Rotten Tomatoes and a 59% audience score. What a sequel, man. This movie, it blew my mind almost as much as the first film. We got more characters. We got our first group trap that many films after tried to imitate, but make no mistake, it was never duplicated.
I am often imitated, but I am never duplicated.
We saw insane traps that weren't just gruesome for the sake of being gruesome. They had meaning behind them, like that needle trap. That was a hard one to watch. That's probably the most difficult one for me to watch throughout all of the Saw films. Not a fan of needles. The acting was rough at times, but again, like, we know what we're getting into with Saw films. We're not here for A-list acting. Samuel L. Jackson was a treat. He was a gift to us. We weren't worthy.
And you will know my name is the Lord when I lay my vengeance upon thee.
But we did see those characters develop pretty well, again, as far as Saw films go. We also really got to know Jigsaw as John Kramer in this film. We are also introduced to Detective Matthews, who is a legend in the Saw franchise. And it's just, this film really just stepped up those mic drop moments. We saw that connection between the victims, or if you consider it a game and you want to be whimsical, you can say contestants.
Something that follows the word pork. You pine. Huh?
And this is also where we see that first storyline timeline shuffle. And the first introduction to an accomplice with Amanda. That was next level. Saw 2, loved it. Each character had a great story. The B storyline was great. The game was great. The characters were great. Just a fantastic film. The runner-up is Saw 3. I think that Saw 3 had the greatest storyline of any Saw film. And I feel like it also had the best game of any Saw film. And it's so underrated. It starts off absolutely buck wild. And the people he's choosing life or death for are all involved either directly or indirectly with the death of his son. The ending was insane. I just really loved this film. It gave me that real shocked vibe that I didn't really get in any Saw film after. It's hard to explain. I feel like there's sort of a macabre, twisted, dark magic sprinkled on Saw 1, 2, and 3 that just haven't come back, not even with this new film. And unfortunately, I think that it's just gonna stay forever within the first 3 films, and that's okay. 3 was sort of the kind of end of an era. That for me is when the real Saw films kind of came to an end. Saw 3 was pretty widely loved by fans, scoring a 71% with audiences and a 28% on the tomato meter. So not bad. I mean, for number 1, does anyone not have the OG Saw? Saw 1 obviously takes the number 1 spot. Out of all the films, this definitely scored highest overall, with an audience score of 84% and a Rotten Tomatoes score of 50. So not too shabby. Quite simply, Leigh Whannell and James Wan are horror geniuses. The majority of this film took place in a room. Obviously, there was bits and pieces of in a room with 2 dudes. I'm still not over it. It was so unique and stylish, even with that extremely low budget. And it gave us this new taste of horror. We got some cheesiness, we got the goriness, a psychological aspect, creepy puppets, a killer plot, all the pun intended. Did I mention we got gore? But the most interesting thing of all that made Saw super unique was the riddles. We got riddles to solve. It was such a clever and unique concept. It gave us all of these things in a neat little box. And at the bottom was sort of this lingering question of how much do you value your life? Thank you so much for checking out my Saw rankings and my Spiral review and my failed Dunkin' Girl Scout coffee review. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up. It really does help my little infantile channel. Subscribe subscribe if you want more coffee and more horror. I'm also on Instagram and TikTok. I will link those down below. Also, some really exciting news. My podcast, Netflix Coffee and Questioning Humanity, is now available on Audible and Amazon Music, but you can listen to it wherever you choose to stream podcasts. It's basically everywhere now, which is just awesome. Anyways, thank you guys so much. Stay caffeinated and stay spooky.